The summer of 1914 opened with a quiet that concealed decades of strain. In the streets of European capitals, daily life continued with familiar rhythm, yet beneath the surface, alliances had hardened, empires had grown anxious, and political tensions had settled into something brittle. It would take only a single moment, brief, deliberate, and irreversible, to fracture that fragile balance. On a June morning in Sarajevo, a young man stepped forward from the crowd, raised a pistol, and fired 2 shots. Within weeks, those shots would echo across continents, drawing nations into a conflict that would reshape the modern world. The origins of that moment stretched far beyond Bosnia. For decades, Europe had been defined by a complex system of alliances and rivalries. Industrial expansion had intensified competition among the great powers, while nationalism stirred unrest within multi-ethnic empires. The Franco-Prussian War had altered the balance of power, leaving a newly unified Germany dominant on the continent and France determined to recover its lost prestige. Meanwhile, the Austro-Hungarian Empire struggled to maintain cohesion among its diverse populations, and the Ottoman Empire continued to decline, creating instability in southeastern Europe. In this environment, alliances became both a safeguard and a risk. Germany aligned itself with Austria-Hungary, while France strengthened ties with Russia. Britain, initially cautious, gradually moved closer to France and Russia, forming what would become the Triple Entente. These agreements were intended to deter conflict, yet they also ensured that any regional crisis could rapidly expand beyond its origins. The Balkans emerged as one of the most volatile regions in Europe. As the Ottoman Empire weakened, newly independent states and nationalist movements competed for territory and influence. Serbia, in particular, sought to unite Slavic peoples under its leadership. This ambition brought it into direct tension with Austria-Hungary, which governed large Slavic populations within its borders and viewed Serbian nationalism as a threat to its stability. By 1914, Bosnia and Herzegovina, annexed by Austria-Hungary in 1908, had become a focal point of these tensions. Many ethnic Serbs living there resented imperial rule and supported the idea of unification with Serbia. Secret nationalist organizations, including networks operating across borders, began to emerge. Among them was a group that would later become associated with the events in Sarajevo, though its exact structure and influence remain subjects of historical study. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, arrived in Sarajevo with his wife, Sophie. The visit was intended as a display of imperial presence, yet it coincided with a date of symbolic significance to Serbian nationalists. Security arrangements were limited, and the Archduke's route through the city had been publicly announced. Several young conspirators positioned themselves along the motorcade's path. Their motivations were shaped by nationalism and political frustration, though their coordination and level of organization have been debated by historians. The first attempt on the Archduke's life failed when a bomb thrown at his car missed its target. The motorcade continued, and for a time, it seemed the danger had passed. Later that morning, a change in route brought the Archduke's vehicle to a stop near one of the conspirators, Gavrilo Princip. Seizing the unexpected opportunity, Princip stepped forward and fired 2 shots at close range. The Archduke and his wife were both fatally wounded. The entire sequence lasted only seconds, yet its consequences would unfold over years. The assassination did not immediately lead to war. Instead, it triggered a period of intense diplomatic activity known as the July Crisis. Austria-Hungary, convinced that Serbian elements had been involved in the plot, sought to respond decisively. With Germany's support, it issued an ultimatum to Serbia containing demands that were intentionally difficult to accept in full. Serbia agreed to most of the terms but rejected those that would compromise its sovereignty. Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, 1914. What followed was not a contained regional conflict but a rapid escalation shaped by alliance commitments and strategic calculations. Russia, viewing itself as a protector of Slavic nations, began mobilizing its forces in support of Serbia. Germany responded by declaring war on Russia on August 1 and on France 2 days later. As part of its military strategy, Germany invaded Belgium to reach France more effectively.
Britain, bound by treaty obligations and concerned about the violation of Belgian neutrality, declared war on Germany on August 4. Within a week, Europe's major powers were at war. The conflict expanded further as additional nations joined, transforming what might have remained a regional dispute into a global confrontation. The scale of mobilization was unprecedented. Millions of soldiers were called to arms, and entire economies were redirected toward the war effort. The early months of the war were marked by movement and uncertainty. Germany's initial advances into France were halted at the Battle of the Marne, leading to a prolonged stalemate on the Western Front. Trenches stretched across hundreds of miles, creating conditions of static warfare that would define much of the conflict. On the Eastern Front, fighting remained more fluid, but it was no less destructive. The war introduced new technologies and methods of combat. Machine guns, artillery, and chemical weapons increased the lethality of engagements, while industrial production allowed for sustained, large-scale operations. Civilians were also drawn into the conflict, both through economic mobilization and, in some regions, direct exposure to violence. As the war continued, its impact extended far beyond the battlefield. Economies were strained, political systems were tested, and societies experienced profound disruption. In Russia, the pressures of war contributed to internal unrest that would culminate in revolution. In the Ottoman Empire, the conflict intersected with internal policies that led to mass displacement and loss of life, events that remain subjects of historical and ethical examination. The United States entered the war in 1917, shifting the balance on the Western Front. By 1918, the cumulative strain on the Central Powers became unsustainable. Germany's final offensives failed to achieve decisive results, and Allied forces began to advance. An armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, bringing an end to the fighting. The consequences of the war were extensive and enduring. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, already weakened before 1914, dissolved into several independent states. The Ottoman Empire also collapsed, leading to new political arrangements in the Middle East. Germany faced significant territorial losses and economic penalties under the Treaty of Versailles, while the League of Nations was established in an effort to prevent future conflicts. The human cost of the war was immense. Millions of soldiers and civilians lost their lives, and countless others were injured or displaced. Entire regions were left physically and economically devastated. The war also altered social structures, including the roles of women in many societies, as they took on responsibilities previously reserved for men. In the years that followed, the unresolved tensions and consequences of the war contributed to further instability. Economic hardship, political extremism, and dissatisfaction with post-war settlements created conditions that would eventually lead to another global conflict. In this sense, the events set in motion by the assassination in Sarajevo extended far beyond the immediate aftermath of 1918. The shots fired on that June morning did not create the underlying tensions of early 20th century Europe, but they acted as a catalyst. They transformed a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and ambitions into a sequence of decisions that no single nation could fully control once set in motion. Each step, mobilization, declaration, invasion, was shaped by calculations made under pressure, often with incomplete information and limited time. Understanding the start of the First World War requires looking beyond the moment itself to the structures and conditions that made such an escalation possible. It was not inevitable, yet it became increasingly difficult to avoid as diplomatic options narrowed and military plans took precedence. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand stands as a defining event not only because of what occurred, but because of how quickly and dramatically it altered the course of history. What began as a regional crisis in the Balkans expanded into a conflict that involved nations across Europe, Asia, Africa, and beyond. It reshaped borders, redefined political systems, and left a legacy that would influence international relations for decades. The war demonstrated the risks of rigid alliances and the consequences of decisions made in moments of uncertainty. In the end, the significance of those two shots lies not in their immediate impact alone, but in their ability to reveal the fragility of the world in which they were fired. They exposed the depth of existing tensions and the speed with which they could escalate into global conflict. More than a century later, the events of 1914 continue to be studied as a reminder of how interconnected political decisions, National ambitions and human actions can shape the course of history in ways that are both profound and lasting.